And I'm now recording.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Haystack Live Meetup. And we have a familiar-looking speaker today. We have Max Irwin from Open Source Connections. And Max is going to be speaking about search engine migration. If you've been in the search business for any time at all, you will have gone through a few migration exercises. They can sometimes be painful. They can sometimes go not as planned, give us the benefit of his long experience and tell us maybe how to avoid some of those problems. Just on the slide there as well, we have a few of our OSC trainings coming up soon, so do check those out. We've got, actually, I think on your slide there, Max, we've got context, which isn't a training.
No, that's next week is the guys from Target.
Next week's Haystack Live. Okay,
Yeah.
So anyway, but there's also some other things there to follow up. But I think without further ado, if you're ready to start, Max, I'm going to let you start your presentation. So welcome, Max. Oh, actually, by the way, if you have a question for Max, do hang on to it. You can drop it in the chat window in the Zoom call, and let you ask your question at the end of Max's talk. We will have some time for questions. So do hang on to those questions and pop them in the chat. And while Max is talking, if you could keep your microphone muted, that would be helpful. So without further ado, Max Irwin.
Thanks, Charlie. So this talk is titled The Search Engine Migration Circus, as Charlie noted before. I want to put like a little bit of a fun spin on this topic. It's typically not so fun when you're actually going through the process. We'll find out why. If you've never gone through a search engine migration before, or a search platform migration, this talk will be very helpful for you. If you have gone through one, it might be digging up some painful memories, but hopefully you can laugh about them now. So who am I? I'm Max Irwin. I'm with Open Source Connections. I have a lot of experience in search. This talk is based on primarily my experience in Wolters Kluwer when I found the Search Center of Excellence. And then before that, I was in Wolters Kluwer in a different division called MediRegs. And I went through several migrations during that period, and I learned a lot. I went through search migrations, and I went through migrations that we had this new search service that I was responsible for, and we were migrating products onto it that were coming from a different search engine. So we weren't migrating the search ourselves, but we were hosting other people who wanted to onboard into the service. And I've done a couple smaller efforts during my tenure here at Open Source Connections. What we did is we devised a playbook, and I'll talk about that more. But first, let's tell a short story. So imagine the pandemic is over. You're free. You can do whatever you want. So you want to celebrate. And you go to your favorite restaurant. And this is awesome. You thought you wouldn't be able to do this ever again. You've been locked up for so long. So you go, and you're having a good time, and you sit down, and the server comes to take your order. And this is your favorite restaurant. You've been here many times before, so you're like, yeah, give me my usual. The server's like, sure, whatever you want, sir. So they go off, and then 15 minutes later, your food arrives. But it's different. It's not what you expected. Something's wrong, and you don't know what's up. So you say, well, what's going on here? You know, this is my favorite, and you guys, you screwed it up. What's happening? Well, the server says, oh, you're going to be so happy about this. We, during the lockdown, we renovated our kitchen. And now all our chefs, they have all the best new appliances and utensils. And they're doing this awesome stuff in the kitchen now with all this new great stuff. So we had to modify our dishes a little bit because of these new tools. But yeah, we love it. We got this whole new setup, and it's going great for us back in the kitchen. Welcome to a search engine migration. You just experienced a change in technology from behind the scenes that disrupted what you were used to and what you enjoyed about the product and enjoyed about the restaurant that you were going to. And this is what the customer feels like when something changes behind the scenes, this big change that they don't see, they don't experience it. In the background, they don't know what you went through. They just see the product and they go and use the product and it's different. So the truth, the hard truth, customers, they do not care about your technology. They just want to find the stuff that they need to get their job done, to find the thing they want to buy, to find the information they're looking for. That's what they want. They don't care about your search engine. They don't care about it about as much as they care about the plumbing behind the walls in a restroom that you're going to. It's completely obscured from them, and they don't care. They just want things to work the way they expect them to work. So you ask yourself, well, okay, nobody cares about this stuff. You had this search engine that was working before. You had this system. Why would you change it? Why would you ever go through this pain for yourself and for your customers? And there are a lot of reasons. These are some of the ones that I've highlighted. The reason that I did our first major migration in 2014, 2015-ish, is, well, we had the search engine Fast ESP that was a Microsoft product. It was actually bought by Microsoft and then served by Microsoft through enterprise licensing, and then they deprecated that. They said it's going away. We're not doing that anymore. So we were like, oh, we got to pick something new. So that was one reason. Another reason is expensive licensing. You may be on some very, very expensive enterprise product that you're not really seeing the value in the amount that you're paying for the license. You want to migrate to an open source engine. Sometimes you got something that it's kind of working right now, but you want to do more. You need to do more to make your customers happy and take them in new directions, take your product in new directions to do bigger and better things, but you can't because you're stuck with this old engine that just isn't doing it for you. It could even be an old version of the same engine. You could be on like Elasticsearch 1.2 or something, and the difference between that and Elasticsearch 7 is like pretty different. So now you got to go through this thing. And then sometimes internal politics. You might be part of a huge organization, and the organization bigwigs are like, oh, we're standardizing on this search engine and we're going to centralize our platform and everybody has to do it like this. Everybody get off your favorite platform of choice. You're going over here. So that happens pretty often as well. And that can be frustrating, especially if you're a smaller product team caught in the bureaucracy and the politics of that organization's whims. But you got to do it. So then you're stuck. And what do? So I mentioned a playbook. I wrote a playbook for what we would use in open source connections when working with a client. So I'm going to show some of the slides there. I'm going to sprinkle it in with some other fun stuff. But the gist of it is this was based off our experience that we went through in various search migrations. It can't cover everything, right? There's always stuff that happens that you can never predict, that you'll never be able to see coming. But you want to be prepared as best you can and make sure that you're doing things in a way that really gives the best outcome for your customers and also for you. So this playbook is, we're going to talk about it going through. And the first thing is you got to know what you need. So do you know what success looks like of a search engine migration? Has that been decided? So this is the most important thing. Really with any feature development or product change, you have to know if you're successful. You have to know if what you did worked. This is the first question that I always ask when somebody's doing this. If you can't define it, if you don't know what it looks like, then don't even bother starting until you've done that. That's the single most important thing. And then from that, you get a project scope, you get a team, you've got some goals that are well defined, and you know why you're doing it, right? And you can access stuff that you need, right? So you have these prerequisites. So these will be different for every team. You might want to get more detailed here, but write down this list. Okay, so where do you write it down? You get a wiki going. It could be part of your existing wiki if you have like Confluence, or you have a wiki that you're already hosting for internal documentation. Keep it there and create a new project in the wiki and be like, this is the migration project. We're going. So write everything down. Write the goals down, write the success down, but also write down everything that you know about the current system. You're moving off of this thing onto this new thing. What do you know about it? What does it look like? What are the things that are going to trip you up? And then obviously you have to decide on what you're moving to. So document that, document reasons why. So this is helpful so that, in 6 months from now, when somebody comes on board and they're like, why did you ever choose this? And you can point and say, well, here's why. So you can save time on tough questions later on if you write down all your decisions and reasons. The most important thing is measurement. So I threw this out there really early on because when you are changing from one thing to another, you have to have a basis for comparison. So there's the definition of success. Success is usually defined by KPIs or metrics or other things. So be able to measure. If you don't know your search quality at the current point of migrating off of it, then you're not going to know if things are better or worse. You're just going to know that they're different, and that could be a disaster. It could work out if you're lucky, but it could not. So you really have to be able to measure this stuff and understand what you're changing and how it's impacting your customers and your internal requirements. So I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Gall's Law. Gall's Law is a very, very important part of a search engine migration because you have systems that are built, and it's not like you just built them in a day. You built them and then they evolved. You added features, you added configuration, team members came on board, you wrapped services around things, you wrote plugins, you changed your content to fit in the search engine the way it is right now, all kinds of stuff. So this is just a very, very big organic system. By the time you get to the point of migration, it has a lot of detail that have been built over time that is now you have this thing, you have this living organism that you're supporting, and you have to replace it with something else that's pretty much equivalent. So how do you do that? That's pretty much, this is the crux of the problem with search engine migrations. It's not as simple as just, oh, we're going to change out the engine. There's whole things surrounding this. And this is really where you have to understand, well, how do you get around this problem? What can you do to mitigate all of the issues that arise because of this? If you just started on day one and started building until you were done and you had a complete equivalent system that matches your legacy system, you'd never finish. You just wouldn't. That's the wrong way to go. So the first thing you do is what we call hello search. And you get a proof of concept up. You get a prototype up with the new search engine and the new schema configuration, and you put as much content in it as you possibly can. Some teams have small content sets, other teams have huge content sets. Index as much as you can, but know how much content you need to have indexed eventually. So even if you can't get it all at once, get a good variety in there and understand the quirks. This is the most important step starting off. Getting here represents a lot. It represents that you can do the basic things that you need to do to have a working system, and then you can grow from that. I also recommend, don't estimate the whole thing before you get here, right? Because you're not going to know. Don't sit around a table and say, oh, we're deciding we're going to migrate to the latest version of Solar. And we're going to do it in 6 months. Well, how do you know that? How do you know it's going to take 6 months? You're just pulling a number out of your head, but you don't understand the details behind this. So give yourself a deadline to get to this point. Say, well, we'll get to Hello Search in a month or 2 months, maybe less, maybe more. And say, well, when we get here, then we'll know, maybe you want to bail out at this point. You know, maybe this is some cost. You say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's try a different engine, or let's revisit something else. So getting here is really, really important, because then you can take what you know from this step and then estimate the whole thing and say, well, we know what's important, and we're gonna go, and it's gonna take X amount of time. And then you write all that stuff down, and you write things down that you need to know. So now you have this system that is basic. It has some stuff in it. And now you have to understand, well, what features are supported in the new engine compared to what we currently have. But it's not just the new engine, it's all the things that surround the engine and integrate with the engine, and what needs to change. So I call this feature parity. So what's feature parity? Feature parity is you have some legacy engine capability or platform capability that surrounds your search, and then you have some new capability. So you have this old system, and you're on the latest Elasticsearch now. Elasticsearch can do a whole bunch of stuff. Legacy engine can do a whole bunch of stuff, and there's no actual full overlap of that, right? There's some things that both can do, right? But there's always going to be things that the old system does, and there's going to be things that the new system does that the other one can't, right? So this is feature parity. So the feature parity is really, really tricky, because you can say, well, oh, we really, really need this feature in the old system, and it doesn't exist in the new one. So we got to build it, or we got to do some workaround and solve that gap, this technical gap. So this is what really takes a lot of time through customization and increasing effort. This can be a real killer. And I'd also go as far as to say that 100% feature parity is impossible. You will never get those two circles to line up perfectly. It's a real challenge. So what do you do? Well, what are people actually using? You have this feature that is really neat. It works in the old system. How many people are actually using it? How many people rely on it to get what they need? Can it be replaced with something new that, okay, well, we can't do it this way, but we can do it this way, and yeah, they're still going to find what they need. It's going to be a little bit different, and people might get a little bit frustrated because of the difference, but that's something you might have to live with, and you have to make trade-offs and understand those trade-offs and see what are the big things. Sometimes you say, well, this is so key, everybody's using it, we can't deprecate it, so now we got to build it, and how much time is that going to take? And you have to build that into your timeline. Which is why, again, Hello Search is so important, because you discover those things. You discover things about the new search engine that you didn't know before. So you can make these decisions. So once you have all that information, now you start a risk register. What did you learn during the Hello Search? You've analyzed your feature sets. You've analyzed these gaps. What are the risks, and how do you get around them? Some people, it's kind of fallen out of favor in recent years, but I still like to look back to the iron triangle, which I think is very helpful. So you have a certain amount of time, you have a certain amount of scope, and you have a certain amount of money, right? And those three things are very, very closely related. You can't blow out your budget, right? You can't just add like 50 people to your project. You can't just say, well, timeline's out the window, we're going to take 2 years, not 6 months. You know, that's going to have serious implications. In scope, you can't have scope creep constantly. You can be like, you can't say, well, oh yeah, we're migrating this new search engine, but we're also building this whole other initiative on top of that new search engine while we're at it. That would be terrible. So don't do that. Understand these things and understand the relationships between them, and know that if one changes, the others are going to be impacted as well. So write down your big risks. And this is from the playbook, of course. And so these are like just blanket things that I wrote down as an example, but you really need your own risk register. And these are kind of worded internally. One thing that I always say, aside from features, is content is a big killer as well. Content always takes longer than you think it does. You might have access to the content, but shaping it is like, oh, well, now we gotta stand up a new ETL pipeline just to get it into our new search engine. We can do a one-time transform for the old stuff, but content is going to be updated as time goes on. Sometimes you're in the unfortunate situation of content is just huge, so you can't just say, oh, here's the latest zip file, developers of our content set. Use this one for all your dev. Sometimes you've got terabytes of content. Maybe even petabytes. And you're saying, well, this is interesting. How are we going to get all this content available and into the new platform? So this, I like to say that this is really the timeline killer. Content is the timeline killer because it holds a lot of unexpected stuff. Features are features. You know, developers can take a look at code and they can say, oh, here are the gaps. And that's very often more clear cut than the content unknowns. It can be very, very hard to get a handle of that. So I just wanted to call out that major risk, which very often plagues migrations. So then you have this list of stuff that you have to do. These are a list of features here, but then you say, well, overall, what is the overall risk of all the things that we have to build? So I kind of created this formula sometime around 2016-ish when I was migrating a product over onto a new platform. And they said, well, what's the risk? And I said, well, how long does this take? How long do you think it's going to take? Ask the developer, how long do you think this is going to take? And they say, oh, that's not too hard, right? Well, how complex is it? How complex is it? How many details do we have to account for? And they say, well, yeah, it's not going to take long. There are some details in there. And then you start enumerating the details and you see that, okay, well, it's not really time consuming, but there's a lot of complexity and there's things that you can miss or things that you can go wrong. So have this understanding of, well, what is the risk of a specific feature, right? I don't know if anybody's ever done work with query parsing, like having a custom query parser or having a custom highlighter, but those were the two big ones for us when we started looking at our query parsing capability and how it interfaced with highlighting. That was like, those things were really hard. We said, okay, this is going to take a while and there's a lot of stuff going on. We looked at the old code base and we said, this is really, really complex. We got to write these new plugins. This isn't going to be fun at all. So we said those two things are the highest risk, and we just said, well, you know, we'll stagger some releases. We'll say we'll have some basic highlighting functionality. We'll have a subset of our query language, and then we'll evolve and grow. Instead of just waiting for a year or 2 years for these things to be rebuilt in the new system, and then delaying everything around that until launch. Sometimes that's not an option. Sometimes it is. But this will help you, again, make decisions and know what you have to do to get around them. Aside from risks, there's just a lot of fun little stuff that comes up along the way. I just wrote down a bunch of things here. This is kind of like a risk register, but this is more of just like, okay, these are facts of things that happened or will happen. Look to people who have done migrations before to kind of get this list going. And this will just kind of help you plan ahead a little bit and just say, even if you don't have relief for something, even if you don't know how to get around the issue, at least you know that it's a possibility and you can say, well, we're gonna have to solve this problem eventually. Let's see until we get there and then we'll figure it out. So to manage all of these things now, you have this huge plan. You have your basic system that was stood up by like a small Tiger team. You have a list of risks, you have a list of features, you have a list of issues that can happen. What do? You break it up into work streams. So you have different work streams that are in charge of different areas. And again, this may be just for the larger migrations, the larger organizations, but understand that, well, there's a team that's really responsible for making sure the content works in the new system. There's a team that makes sure that the analytics are integrated properly and you're getting the metrics that you need. There's a team that's responsible for setting up your infrastructure and operating search and making sure that it can hold the content set and the query volume effectively. There's the people who write all the services that have to wrap the search engine with code and abstractions so that it can talk to the product layer. And then there's the people who have to finally tune relevance. Once you have a bunch of stuff in the system and you have some basic things ready, now you got to make sure that the relevant stuff is floating to the top, right? So all of these different things, and there can be more, are really, really key. And having people who focus on these areas and really, really spend their time just on this and not get distracted with other things will really help streamline the migration and make sure that everybody's on board, everybody's understanding what they're responsible for, and everybody's working together. So obviously you have all these intertwined dependencies, but if you have this alignment, there are different product methodologies that you can use. We were using, for a bunch of these migrations, the SAFE framework, the Scaled Agile framework, which was a bit bulky, if you ask me. There was a lot of stuff involved with running a SAFE project. I wasn't a fan of the acronym either, but it got it done. There were a lot of meeting overheads and communication overheads as part of SAFE. A lot of Post-it notes and a lot of whiteboards with yarn tying the Post-it notes together. We had some fun times, but pick what works for you and make sure that the teams that are focusing on these things, they're working together and they're talking together and they know, okay, well, I'm going to get this content set on this date. Oh, but you need to test the relevance by this date. So you have to align the two and make sure that, we schedule and coordinate. So the content pipeline. And I stole this from Hofstadter's law. I mentioned content before. Content always takes longer than you expect, even when accounting for Max Irwin's law. So that's a joke about, Hofstadter wrote this law. The systems always take longer than they expect, even when accounting for Hofstadter's law. So you can think that your content is well understood, and sometimes it is if you're very lucky. But there's all these kinds of little things that creep up. Like sometimes you're like, oh yeah, well, we've got this field for the region. We've got a region field in our content set, but the way it's stored in the legacy system is kind of weird. So now we got to map that region to this new thing, and how are we going to do that? So all these little issues start to pop up, and when you're integrating content into a configured system, also as you're evolving the configuration of that system to handle this content, things can take longer than you expect. So just take your estimate on the content and provide a reasonable buffer for things that'll probably pop up that you didn't see coming. And the more analysis you do up front as you can afford for content before you do your overall migration estimate, the better. Reporting. So you have to rely on data at this time. So you have to know, well, we're just going to not make any instinctual choices or gut choices. We're going to measure everything, and we're going to just make all of our decisions based on what we see. So you can be proactive about this, or you can be reactive about this. So you can launch a system and you can say, well, here's our relevance dashboard, and we're going to set up KPI thresholds and say, oh, you know, downloads on the first page are really dropping. You know, that's not good. What's going on? Are things not showing up on the first page that they need to? And this really helps you see what issues you have with your test customers and then eventually your real customers using the system. So this is really, really important. It goes back to the measure everything. It's really hard to set up a full-blown measurement system if you don't have the culture there already. Some teams are already about all this, so it should be second nature to them. But if you don't really have a mature measurement capability when you are starting a migration, you're going to have a lot of trouble understanding, well, we know it's different, but we don't know if it's better. And then you're going to see the impacts of that later on when customers stop using the site and you don't know why. So tuning, you got to tune. We use hypothesis-driven development for tuning. So you write a hypothesis, you run an experiment, you log the results, and you review. Is it better? Is it worse? And you decide, are you going to use it or are you going to not? And then you create further hypotheses based on that. And you always communicate. So as you're tuning, make sure that people know, well, MDCG is down because we made this change. We're going to try again. We're going to try something else and see what happens. I threw this in because now we're going to talk about operations a little bit. But oftentimes, you know, you have this system, and my fun anecdote is we had a huge content set in a data center somewhere, and it was managed in Plano, Texas, by a third party. And as part of this migration, some genius decided that we're also going to move to Amazon and not just try to migrate within the data center. So it added this whole other layer of complexity. And we didn't really know how to size the cluster appropriately. It ended up being a very expensive mistake. So we spent a lot of time mucking around with Amazon at the same time we were trying to do this migration, and that was fun. So remember that content behaves differently, and also query volume behaves differently in one system versus another. So sometimes, you know, if you're on some legacy platform that's written all in C and there's no garbage collection and it's just like working on a you know, a reasonable amount of iron, and you migrate to a Java-based framework, now you got to worry about garbage collection and all these other things that you didn't have to think about before. And you're going to spend more money, you're going to spend more time, and you're going to spin your wheels trying to debug why your cluster is going down, why, you know, what's going on, are you sharding right, are you replicating right, do you have enough instances, are the memory is the memory of the instances correct, did you spend too much money on CPU? You know, should you get reserved instances in Amazon, or should you just pay by the hour until you know what's what? So that's a problem that you have to solve. And my recommendation here is stay in the same environment that you currently have, stay in the same infrastructure, data center, what have you, and just move it over to the new system and test there. Don't try to do this whole lift into some cloud before you know the impact of the new engine on memory and cost. And then aside from that, you have to do all the other things to keep the platform alive, right? So you have to make sure there's good security. You have to make sure you can do deployments properly. High availability, what if your cluster goes down? Or do you have another one? Disaster recovery, what if the whole thing explodes and you have to spin it up again? Are you doing your cluster sizing? Are you doing sharding and replication appropriately? Are you monitoring to see if you're running out of disk space and then alerting appropriately on it? So these are all the questions that you have to ask yourself, and how are you solving these problems for a new system? And of course, the fun part is that while you're migrating, you have two of these things. So now you have to spend the money on this old system and this new system at the same time, and that is going to be tricky for you. So make sure you take all this into account. Don't just say like, okay, we put Solar on a server and we put all our content in it and now we're live. And then like a week later, this cluster goes down and you don't have a backup, and that's no fun. Through all this, now never forget about the customer. So this is really, really what you're doing this for, is you're making sure that, well, yes, you have your own internal needs while you're migrating. Don't leave the customer behind in favor of your internal needs. Always remember back to the restaurant example. You know, make sure that when they come, they're finding what they need. So understand what their information needs are. Get friendly with customer success, and build for them. Don't build for your agile process. It's very, very hard to do this, especially if you're you know, removed from a couple layers. Search teams are often like, okay, well, if you have a product owner who's working directly with you, maybe they interface directly with the customer. So that's at least one layer of removal from like the technical team, sometimes even more. And that can be a challenge. So always remember to understand what the customer needs. So how do you do this? Use real data, right? So you have your current system, interview your customers, say, what were you looking for when you went through this scenario? Let's walk through these things together in the old system. Oh, I was looking for this. Oh, I got stuck, or I found it. And oh, this is, you know, tricky. And then do the same thing on the new system and see the differences. And say, oh, well, last time I found it here, but now it's gone. It's not on the first page. So I don't know what's up with that. So now I got to refine, and oh, there it is. Or, you know, maybe something that didn't work properly before that was a nuisance for them, now it's working, and they're like, oh, this is great. I love it. Yeah, make sure that everything works all the time perfectly, which of course they'll always ask for. But just understand that as you're doing this and as you're taking your customers through this change, you understand what their behaviors were, what their habits were or are, and how you're going to replicate those, how you're going to meet those needs right now, because they're used to it. They've been using it for a while. And you want to make sure that the transition isn't jarring for them. This is another interesting way to just test the difference between two result sets. So we call this damage, and you can say, well, I've got two systems, right? I've got my legacy system and I've got my target system, and I run a query against it, and here are all the IDs in positions, in this case 1 through 7, that showed up in the results for the old system. In the new system, you run the same query and you see the new results, and you say, well, what's different? How did things change? So you look at this and you see the damage. You can calculate damage based on this. So you're going to get new documents that you didn't see on this first page before, and you have documents that you used to see but you don't see anymore. So now, what do? Typically, you look at this in concert with analytics, and you see, well, yeah, the document in the 6th position, number 73409, that's off the page now, or it's not even in the result set coming back, but who cares? Because nobody was clicking on that anyway. So that's fine. But sometimes, you know, the document in the 2nd position, 53876, that's gone. And people really wanted that document because that was people would click on that and download that for that query. So now you have to say, well, let's tune and fix that missing document. And you got to do this for a lot of stuff. So this is part of tuning, but this is a nice way to just see, based on your query logs, you know, take actual queries for this, of course, and run the new queries in batch and just get a number. You're like, oh, it's different by X, you know, and you can average these numbers together and see what the difference is. And I've seen different scenarios where, you know, like new documents have a certain amount of change associated with them, and documents that are gone have a certain amount of change associated with them. Tweak the number to best fit you so that it makes sense. Okay, so now you know what your customers need, what scenarios they've gone through, what the damage is. You still want to avoid just like, okay, we're going to cut over. New system is live, old system is dead. Forget it. It's typically not possible in a lot of situations anyway. So you basically have this concept of, well, we're willing to support the platform, the legacy platform, until this date, right? We're going to pay the money. We're going to eat the costs until here. This is as much as we can take, right? And then you've got your new platform lifespan, and you say, well, the old platform is going to die here. We have to launch by this date. So we're going to get this new platform up, and we're going to have some overlap where you have two systems alive. And that, that impacts cost, of course. The longer you have both systems alive, the more money you're spending, the more overhead you're spending in keeping both going. And then you have this customer migration period. So you say, well, while both of them are alive, we want to get everybody over. So really the best way to go forward is you let customers voluntarily, and I say voluntarily in quotes, upgrade themselves. Sometimes you just give them the new search engine and maybe make a little note like you're part of the beta period or whatever, and then let them back out. People will slowly move over, right? People will have reasons to go, and I'll talk about those reasons later on. But you're always going to have stragglers. You're always going to have the people who just wait until the absolute minute, and they're like, I'm not moving. I'm staying with the old thing. And then eventually you just have to kick them over, and maybe you lose them as customers. But the hope is that with the new platform, you gain customers, right? So you want to make sure that the new system accounts for a bigger market share, and you're getting more from the new platform than the old one, right? So some people are just they're gonna bail, and it's an acceptable loss, but you got to make up for it with newer stuff. So going through all this, you got to keep this customer migration period. You got to keep a close eye on your KPIs. You have to know, well, are people leaving more? Are they downloading more? What's going on? So using these KPIs and paying especially close attention to them during this period and comparing the two will help you evaluate what you need to focus on during that time. So you might see that downloads are dropping off on the new platform compared to the old, and you say, well, what's going on here? And you scramble together and you fix the problem, and you do whatever you can to make sure that, oh, well, it turns out these documents were really key and they're not on the first page, so let's get them on the first page. And you do that, and then you watch your KPIs go up. So this is harder than it sounds, of course, but it's something that you got to do, and you have to be able to measure. Again, measurement is definitely the theme throughout all of this. Incentivize. So you really have to give people a reason to come over, right? You're presenting this new platform to them. You have this old platform. You can put you can have like a little bit more carrot and less stick, right? So you could say, well, we're launching this new feature, which we know that people have been holding out for a long time, and we're going to launch that on this date, right? So we're going to say we're done with the migration. We're in the migration period right now. Things are stable, and then you announce to people, say, we're working on this new feature that everybody's been waiting for. The legacy system's been holding us back. Now we're going to be able to do it, and then you give them a reason to come over, and you get them to cheer for you. Don't just say, oh, we're switching the new platform. Here's the new one. See you later. That people don't often like that. So you should give them a reason to switch. And always celebrate. Don't forget to celebrate. Celebrate at Hello Search. Celebrate when you get your content pipeline stood up. Celebrate when you hit milestones. Celebrate when you get customer feedback. Celebrate when you have things working and going smoothly. That's really, really important. These things tend to take a while. They can be rather frustrating. Try to lessen the load of the frustration as much as possible. and that is all. That is the talk. So we may have some questions. I'm happy to go back and look at any slides or stick around for a while. Looks like we've been going for almost 55 minutes or an hour-ish. I've got time. I can stick around and answer as many questions as you like.
Thank you very much, Max. I'm just getting ready for my the task migration, the next migration in the search engine migration circus. So yeah. Anyway, so Max, thank you very much. So do we have any questions for Max? If you'd like to drop them in the chat, we'll give you a minute or two just to do that, and I'll introduce you so you can ask your question. I've been through this journey a few times myself, and especially with things like different query parsers. Trying to emulate the query structure of one search engine in another is always fun, because you never get it 100% right, and you always end up with strange results. And I've even been in the situation of having to replicate broken query parser behavior in a new engine, because it's what people expected from the old engine. At least they knew the broken bits and could work around it. And if you fix them, they complain. So we've got our first question here. A thank you from Andy, just saying, can you go back in time and do this talk a few years ago, please?
Cheers, Andy. Thank you. I'd love to.
A few of us, I think, would like that. Any other questions for Max now? I can see, I'm sure you're all pondering some fantastic questions. Oh yes, so Abhilash asks, while measuring search relevancy, are there any evaluators out there? He's found the Elasticsearch Search Rank Evaluator.
Ah, great question. So yes, there are several out there. So we have the open source project Cupid, QUEPID.com. Charlie, you can, if you want to drop that in the chat. Yeah, thank you. That's one that Open Source Connections stewards as an open source project. So we use that pretty often, just in general, not just during migrations, for measuring overall. That's a really nice interface that you can use to score documents and then measure. There's another project called Rated Ranking Evaluator, another open source project developed by the folks at CEAS. That's more like developer-ish. So you can, that's a command line tool where you have a JSON collection of judgments and you can run them against various search engines and do comparisons. So those are the two tools that we recommend.
Okay, so we've got another question about recording the session, and yes, we do have a Haystack Live playlist in our YouTube channel, which I've just dropped it into the chat there for you, Martin. Do we have any other questions for Max? If you'd like to ask your question in person, please, there's not enough of us here for it to be too confusing, so do please unmute your microphone and you can ask Max in person. Just to be clear, the playbooks Max mentioned, this is something we developed at OSC. We use some projects for ourselves, but I think the overall concept's really powerful. Have a playbook for these processes, and we're hoping to improve and add to that as we go through any more of these migrations. Max, you've given them so much information, there's not a single question. Here we go. Abhilash, thank you. When you combine deep learning with search, typically re-ranking the results, it adds the response times to the order of 3 to 4 seconds. Any remedies in mind?
So if you're talking about like learning to rank or deep learning or other things, yeah, that's a problem. I don't know if it's necessarily related to migrations, but in general, you can do a couple things. Typically, the quickest win to reduce the time is to just do a re-rank instead of ranking all your results. So, you have your traditional search will return results with your with your query configuration and your boosts and all that stuff. And then you specify the learning to rank or whatever your model as a re-rank function to just do maybe the top 100 results, right? So you have to have a really good initial config to get the good stuff, not all the way to the top, but just in the top 100. And then you do the re-rank just on those results, and that will speed things up. Yeah, so that's the first thing you should definitely try.
Okay. Carlos asked, while migration, did you index? I think what Carlos means here is, could the user see both systems in a migration and choose between them, or were they forced to migrate from one to the other? I hope I've explained that correctly, Carlos.
Yeah, so I went through a bunch of migrations, and I've done a mix, right? My recommendation is let them choose based on my experience, because we did have a situation where we brought everybody over and it wasn't fun. And we scrambled to fix things, and we lost some customers, and we got some angry stuff, and it took a little while to recover. Then another product we had where people just gently migrated, and we did that. I'm reading your question now, and I think for indexing content, you have content going into both, right? So during that customer migration period where you have that overlap, the two systems should be running as they would be running, right? So if you're indexing new content in the new platform, you're doing it in the legacy platform and vice versa. So everybody has the same content, everybody's doing the same thing. And then eventually you just flip the switch. You leave the old system hanging around for a while in case of an emergency, but eventually you can just turn it off. I think that was your question. So hopefully we answered it.
So Eric has a question about improving content while doing a migration. Seems like we often try to improve our ETL processes as part of a migration project, but this changes the underlying data between the old and the new search engine. Should we do that? Should we not do that?
Yeah, great question. Well, thanks for the really hard question, Eric. Sometimes you can, if you are on a really old data pipeline, and maybe it's just like a job that runs every night, and it's like this really hooky bunch of like bash scripts that do something that isn't very clear, and you want to have a better content pipeline, by all means, do what's best for the team. And makes things easier. So I would go with the path of least resistance, right? So if it's really hard for you to get your old content pipeline to work with the new system, and you just want to, break the mold and then do your own thing to make things a lot easier on yourselves in the future, then by all means do that. Just remember, you're going to impact timeline if you're building a new thing. You're going to have to support this new thing. There's likely details that you don't know about that you're going to have to figure out. You're going to have to look at the old ETL and say, well, it does all this stuff, but there's a lot of edge cases and a lot of weird things going on. Is it really going to be able, are we really going to be able to make a new pipeline effectively and handle all those edge cases? So those are really good questions that you have to ask.
Okay, so do we have any? Fantastic. We'll jump into relevant Slack. You can find the link on our website if you'd like to ask further questions. We do hang about in there, so I'm sure we could discuss this as we go along. We'll be back next week with another Haystack Live talk from the chaps from Target on context-sensitive autocomplete suggestions. Do pass the word to any of your colleagues who might be interested. And of course, do remember our training sessions. I think the first one, Think Like a Relevance Engineer for Elasticsearch is now, but TLRE for Solar, which starts on the week of the 21st of July, still has some tickets available, as do Learning to Rank and Natural Language Search. So I'd just like to thank Max for your talk today, and we'll see you all again here back on the Haystack Live channel. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.